I thought I'd tell a true story that happened to me when I was a little kid. I turned out to be a school teacher, so everything's about kids. And I was one too. There was a book called Bedtime Stories, which was around for years, I guess. And my mother used to read me bedtime stories way after I was this tall. And I was almost in Little League, and she was still reading me bedtime stories. So I must have been 8 or 9 or something like that. And she read a story to me which I'll never forget, and it affected my life rather significantly, I guess. It was about a boy who had a real witch of a neighbor, and notice I started with a W rather than another letter. Years later, my older brothers called our neighbor with the B. But it was a story of a neighbor who was really nasty to these kids, and probably because the kids were nasty to her. And she had done something really, really rotten to the kids, and the kids were mad, and they got back at her, and she escalated it, and it was a terrible thing. But at the end of this story, which was in the bedtime story, something happened that the kids made a little present and left it for this woman on her porch. And I remember from the story, it was from the Surprise Packet Company, and made very officially. And she thought it was wonderful. And she wasn't nasty to kids anymore. I decided that with my friends, and I must have been about 8 years old, that we would do something to this woman that we were really nasty to. We were baseball freaks, and we had a backyard that was 50 by 50 by 50. 50 by 50. Counting a house. Anyway, and the fence was about this high, and she had roses about twice as high as the fence. And the roses weren't set up to withstand the baseballs, the tennis balls, the footballs, and especially the basketballs. And my oldest brother, who was 6 years older than me, went over that fence once and into her little back porch and came out with armloads of every shaped ball in the world that she had copped from us when they went over the fence. That was her way to get back. And I remembered this story from years earlier, from the bedtime story that my mother had read to me. And I set up a Surprise Packet Company, and I got my friends who thought this was a little girlish and a little weird, because we were going to be baseball players, you know. You didn't do little girlish things. But my mother had these pinking shears that made is that what you call them? That made the crooked? Okay. And someone had showed me how to take Kleenex tissues and tie them together with a
rubber band?
Rubber band or something like that, a little metal thing. And then you spread them apart. Oh, you cut them somehow. Well, a lot of you remember it.
It sounds like yes.
And you made what was a perfect flower with a base on it. And it was very thick because it was a lot of tissue papers that you could really cram together. And then you cut them with the picking shears. And then when they got opened up, you colored them with some paints or something, and then the pièce de résistance. You stole some powder, smelly stuff from your mother's and you put on top, because old ladies like that stuff, and they would like it. And we made this really neat bouquet, and and I'm choking now because it was such a neat thing, just doing it. from the surprise packet company. Just what I read in the, or heard in the story that my mother read to me when I was a real little kid. And we put it on her front door step and took off. And she wouldn't know who did it, even though we lived next door. She would never expect it. Although I was the littlest one. There was a four-year older than me and a 6-year older than me, and they were rotten. They were nasty. They would stand and yell at her and call her names that I don't even want to repeat here. The old biddy face. Somehow or other, that was really nasty to me. Just and say when she was there in the yard. And I don't know why we did this, but I got some friends to help me, and we put it there. Lo and behold, her best friend, I didn't know, lived across the street from us. And she was always out working on her yard, and she spied us crawling up and putting stuff on her front porch. And she called Mrs. McCann, Mrs. McMahon. Her name was Mrs. McMahon, which I thought was a pretty weird name for a woman to be called Mrs. McMahon. And she apparently had called Mrs. McMahon and said, "Look out, those little
Devils.
devils, thank you. Sons of devils, that's exactly what I was going to say. We're on the porch, so look out."
Oh, no.
And this was Route 1 in Milford, Devon, Connecticut. We were about 100 feet off Route 1, so the traffic came off Route 1 and up past our house, and there was no place to play except in our backyard. And if we tried to play in the street, baseball games and stuff, they would go in Mrs. McMahon's front yard then, the balls, and she would, it would do just as much damage to flowers and everything. And so we had tried it out there, and then went back to the backyard. Anyway, about 2 days went by, and we went out into the front street again at a time that there wasn't a lot of traffic, and we started playing the game there. And we heard the front door open and slam, and then saw something there, and a hand came out the door, like that. Mrs. McMahon's door. And I figured, okay, she wouldn't put a bomb there. Maybe a threat that my mother's going to find out about the awful things we've been doing. And I walked up there, and there were about 3 of us playing in the street, wildly, the only way to do it. And there was a monster plate of chocolate chip cookies and a glass of milk. I think, well, there were 4 of us, so there were 4 glasses of milk, which was really kind of neat, because when you're eating that much cookies, a ton of cookies, you need milk. And we wolfed it down, and the next day we were out playing, and she came out, and I stopped, and a couple of friends were with me. This was out in the backyard, and she said, "Elliott." And I walked over the fence, and she said, "I cried. That was so nice." And that's it.